Hello and welcome to the All Nations Church podcast. I'm James Aubrey. I'm joined again today by Kier Adams.
Hello.
We left you on a little bit of a cliffhanger in our last episode. We are joined again by our resident C.S. Lewis expert, Sophie Bowtell.
Hello.
It's great to have you back with us.
You laughing at that accolade?
It's true.
A little bit.
I think Sophie definitely is our resident C.S. Lewis expert.
I think so.
And we talked in our last episode about his origins. Born in Belfast in 1898, died in 1963, decided he wanted to be called after the family dog very early in life, so his friends and family called him Jack. Came to Christ in his 30s, had a massive influence on the Christian world through his apologetic writing and his devotional writings, which we touched in the last episode. But we couldn't talk about C.S. Lewis and ignore the huge impact he's had through his series of books written specifically for children but enjoyed by adults all across the world, which have come to be known as the Chronicles of Narnia. Now you might ask yourself, why are we talking about a series of children's books in a Christian podcast, in a church podcast about heroes of the faith? Well, I think that it's important for us to point out, first of all, that the Bible is full of stories.
Yeah.
So one of God's ways of communicating truth to us and inspiring us in our faith is through story. And the second thing is that Lewis was an explicitly and deliberately Christian storyteller.
Yeah.
So all of his published fictional writings are published after he came to faith, and all of them have a very deliberate Christian overtone to them. There's his story, The Great Divorce, which is about people taking a day trip from hell to heaven. There's his space trilogy, which we've mentioned already, which is 3 books set in kind of an alternative reality with spiritual forces taking place in different parts of the world. It's very complicated, and I must be honest, I gave up on it. Sorry, listeners. But far and away the most important and the most significant and probably the most enjoyable series of fictions that Lewis wrote are the Chronicles of Narnia.
Yeah.
7 books. The order of them can be debated as to which order do you read them. But perhaps the most famous one, and the one that he wrote first and was published first, is The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. So, Sophie, do you want to tell us a little bit about Narnia? You've mentioned in the last podcast that you first read them when you were 10 years old. You reread them quite a lot, which is a wonderful thing to do. So kind of, for someone who's never heard of Narnia, they've never read the stories or seen the movies or the fantastic BBC television show that was on when I was a kid.
Phenomenal. It is, absolutely.
That was phenomenal.
The CGI is incredible.
I just remember the Turkish delight being really, really tempting. So for someone who knows nothing about Narnia, tell us about what Narnia is, what the kind of basic premise of the story is, and then we'll dive in from there.
So, like you said, James, the first book written, published, is The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. And it's about a family of children who are living during the war, World War II, and they are evacuated from London to go and live with a man that we only know as the Professor in The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe. We discover he has another purpose in the series as well later on. But so it's about a family of children, a group of 4 children who live in our world. They go to live with this man called the Professor, and they discover a wardrobe in his house, which takes them through to another world, which is Narnia. And they discover all the kind of wonderful adventures that Narnia has to offer. And it's too tempting to stay in our ordinary, very basic world. And so the kind of call and the temptation to return to Narnia.
So we've got these 4 children. There's Peter, Edmund, Lucy, and Susan, the Pevensey children.
Yes.
And they're the kind of the heroes of the story. Now, you've mentioned the wardrobe.
Yes.
Perhaps you could tell us about the witch and the lion.
So there's a lion in the story called Aslan. And he pops up only occasionally. He's talked about a great deal by everybody in Narnia. And it's all very, very hush-hush because the witch of The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe has taken over and cast an eternal winter. She's not liked very much at all. She absolutely is the antagonist. But murmurings of Aslan coming back and saving the day are what's going on underneath the whole way through the book. And of course, spoilers, Aslan comes back and saves the day.
He does. Now, kind of there are two kind of particularly kind of redemptive set pieces in The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe that are particularly poignant when you read them, and if you've watched the films you know about them as well. And the first one involves Edmund, one of the Pevensey children, and the second one involves Aslan himself. So we've tell us a bit about Edmund and his relationship with the witch.
So Edmund arguably thinks slightly differently from his siblings, the way that he views the world. And when his younger sister, Lucy, introduces him to Narnia, he doesn't believe her when she tries to tell him at first. But he goes and explores and discovers, wow, this could really be something for me. I could see my life changing here. I could be a someone, because my older brother and sister don't know about this place yet. And he meets the witch, the White Witch, on she's kind of on the road. He has an argument with his sister and he's off separate. Sorry, I should probably say that. He's walked off, and he meets the witch, and she's very charming. Lulls him into a false sense of security, definitely plays on his immaturity, but also his pride. She picks up quite quickly that he wants to be a somebody, and she says that she can make him a somebody. She says, I can make you a king, I can make you a ruler of this place, and it's all too much for Edmund to resist. There's a little bit of Turkish delight thrown in there as well.
There is some Turkish delight thrown in there, yeah. And we should say as well that Narnia is in permanent winter, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
So they meet and it's cold. And so this plays out quite significantly later on in the story, doesn't it? Because once all the Pevensey children are in Narnia, and once kind of they've met Aslan, the witch brings back to their attention something that Edmund has done. Yes,
which part of the White Witch's conditions on Edmund becoming this great elite being is that basically he sells his siblings to her because he doesn't know that there's been a prophecy about the sons of Adam coming and restoring Narnia to its kind of former glory. And so he doesn't know that basically he's agreed to hand over his brother and his two sisters to be killed so that this prophecy can never come to be, because he's only thinking about himself.
Yeah.
So later on, once he starts kind of learning a little bit more, and he decides to try and escape the White Witch, he is held to account for this agreement and commitment that he has made. She comes back to him and says, but you said they are mine because you agreed.
Yeah.
And that's where we start to see Aslan's role taking a much greater prominence, because in the same way that Jesus did for us, Aslan trades his life with Edmund's.
He does, doesn't he? And he's killed on the stone table.
Yeah.
And then, in true fantastic fashion, what happens next?
He dies.
Yes.
But he comes back to life.
He comes back to life. And he's found by Lucy and Susan.
Yes.
And there's a great scene where, and I have to be honest with you, my favourite character in the Narnia stories is Lucy. I really love her wide-eyed wonder at Aslan.
Yeah.
And she just loves him.
Yeah.
And it actually comes out really well in the films as well.
Yes, it does.
The way the young girl plays Lucy, she shows a great deal of affection and wonder every time she sees Aslan.
Yeah.
And she says to him, aren't you dead then, dear Aslan? Lucy said, not now, said Aslan. And later on, he says to her, "The witch knew the deep magic. There is a magic deeper still which she did not know. Her knowledge goes back only to the dawn of time. But if she could have looked a little further back into the stillness and the darkness before time dawned, she would have read there a different incantation. She would have known that when a willing victim who had committed no treachery was killed in a traitor's stead, the table would crack and death itself would start working backwards."
Wow.
It's amazing, isn't it?
Yeah.
And of course, it doesn't take a genius to work out who Aslan is meant to be and everything
Yeah,
like that.
absolutely.
But it's incredibly powerful, incredibly poignant, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
I totally agree with you about Lucy. Her sense of discernment, actually, is wonderful.
Yes, that's a very good way of putting it. Yeah.
She very, very quickly identifies who is good and who isn't. We meet a character. The first character, actually, we meet once we enter Narnia is Mr. Tumnus.
Mr. Tumnus, yeah.
And he has an interaction with Lucy where, again, he lulls her into a false sense of security and invites her back to his home, and ultimately he drugs her because he believes he needs to give her to the White Witch, but she knows that he's good.
Yeah.
Deep down, that isn't who he is. That awful action doesn't define him. But she's able to recognise that the White Witch is just evil through and through.
Yeah.
Therefore, we don't deal with her nonsense.
Yeah.
We don't take any of her rubbish. I just find it fascinating. And it's so interesting in the dynamic of having three older siblings, her kind of overcoming that, knowing that about herself, but not having her siblings believe her. It's very fascinating. But yes, it is one of my favourite kind of descriptors when Susan and Lucy go to see Aslan, because all these little mice come out and they chew through the ropes that are tying him down, and it's just, it's remarkable. Susan turns away. She's like, "Oh no, what are they going to do to him? I can't bear it." And Lucy's like, "No, you need to look.
Yeah.
You have to look."
So without wanting to give away the ending of The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe, because we'd like anyone who's not had a chance to read it to read it.
Yes, of course.
It is a happy ending.
It is a wonderful ending.
Lewis actually revisits Narnia 6 more times, doesn't he?
He does. The second book publishes Prince Caspian, which he absolutely thought was the end.
Yeah, because it's subtitled A Return to Narnia, isn't it? So it does make it sound like it.
And then after that, The Voyage of the Dawn Treader.
So tell us a bit about those two stories, because they're kind of almost as famous as The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe. They've both been made into movies. Whether you like them or not, I don't know. I quite like them. I think they're okay.
They're the charm.
Yeah.
I think Prince Caspian is the best of the three, in my personal opinion. I think that's a pretty good film.
So in both Prince Caspian and The Voyage of the Dawn Treader, we see the Pevensies return in some form. So in Prince Caspian, all of them return. And at spoilers. I feel like we can't avoid them.
Spoiler warning.
Peter and Susan, at the end of Prince Caspian, discover that they are now too old. They've kind of matured, they've grown, they've received what they needed to from Narnia, and so they can no longer return. But excitingly for Edmund and Lucy, they are able to return. Yeah. And in The Voyage of the Dawn Treader, they bring their cousin with them, Eustace, who they are staying with at the time. But yeah, Prince Caspian actually introduces us to more Narnians taking a bigger role in the story, which I really love, because Lewis has now set up for himself a much greater kind of palette to be working with. In that sense, he's able to dip more into the Narnian side if he so chooses.
And there's a lot. It's a very kind of simple motif of a usurper king has deposed the rightful king, and the story is of the rightful heir taking his place. And so it's kind of a really kind of very simple biblical kind of picture there, isn't there? Of not only Christ's work on the cross, which kind of that redemptive sacrifice we see in the Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe, but Prince Caspian then really shows us the means by which the usurper, the enemy of God's purposes, has been overcome, and then the rightful king is in his place.
Yeah.
And then from there, the Voyage of the Dawn Treader, that king then goes out to conquer and to redeem and rescue other people. Because the plot there is he's gone to rescue 7 kings or 7 lords who've been deposed.
Yeah. Which is certainly an adventure in itself.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I like one of my favourite stories, and we'll get onto this about books and stuff later, but one of my favourite stories is Voyage of the Dawn Treader, because I think it's just such a fantastic adventure.
Yes.
It's in many ways quite funny as well. But I think one of my favourite lines or pieces of conversation in all of the books is at the end of the Voyage of the Dawn Treader, and I've got it here, which when they finish their voyage and they're returning to their world, and they have this conversation with Aslan, because for all that Lewis does, he sets up these stories that obviously depict biblical narratives. But he effectively they have this conversation where the kids say to Aslan at the end, will you visit us in our world? And he says, I shall be watching you always. How? They say. He says, in your world, I have another name. Yes. You must learn to know me by it. That was the very reason you were brought to Narnia, that by knowing me here for a little, you may know me better there. And you just think, wow, I mean, what a beautiful way of effectively just really saying, look, this is what I've been doing. Through these stories, I want you as the reader to know this real person, Jesus.
So this was his sign off. He was like, if I'm gonna leave them with one thing, this has to be it. Yeah. And he does set it up beautifully throughout the whole book. But he was like, you must know this one thing.
Yeah. It is beautiful, and it almost reminds me in many ways of Jesus when he's telling parables, and he goes to the disciples and says, I want to make sure you've got this. This is the story. This is what I meant by telling you this story. And in many ways it is that, isn't it?
Yes. How, without spelling it out, can I make it more obvious?
Like finish with, like Aslan equals Jesus.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And before we dive into the other books, and I think it's worth saying that reading those 3 books is a great exploration for any Christian, particularly if you're a young Christian, if you've got small children. Reading through The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe, reading through Prince Caspian, and reading through Voyage of the Dawn Treader is well worth your time.
Yeah, absolutely.
They would be, and I'm speaking from experience here because I've read all 7 books to my older 2 kids, but they are great bedtime reading.
Yeah.
So, Sophie, why do you think, or do we know why Lewis kept writing more Narnia stories?
He said they just sort of kept happening.
Okay. The muse descended.
I've got a quote from a letter that he wrote. He had lots and lots and lots of people writing to him and asking him when the next installment was gonna be coming. But basically, he just felt like there continued to be things needing to be said. A girl called Anne wrote to him and kind of asked about his intentions for the Chronicles of Narnia. But Anne asked him about a scene in the Silver Chair, which I know we haven't touched on.
Which is the next book that was published, isn't it?
Yes, it is. But Aslan, Eustace and Jill, who are kind of our main characters. So Eustace and Jill are the children from our world who enter Narnia, are in Aslan's country, and they've just witnessed the restoration of the dead King Caspian to full life and youthful vigour. One thing we haven't mentioned, which I've just realised, sorry, I will jump back in, is time moves much quicker in Narnia than it does in our world. So in some of the stories, when the children return to Narnia, they can't quite understand why buildings look dilapidated, or a person they've known previously is now no longer there, but it's because time moves much quicker. So when they've seen King Caspian come back to life, Jill can't understand what she's seen, so Aslan explains that Caspian had died, and so had he. It's quite a difficult premise for a child to understand. So Anne writes to Lewis, and he writes, "What Aslan meant when he said he had died is, in one sense, plain enough. Read the earlier book in this series called The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe, and you will find the full story on how he was killed by the White Witch and came to life again. When you have read that, I think you will probably see that there is a deeper meaning behind it. The whole Narnian story is about Christ. That is to say, I asked myself, supposing that there really was a world like Narnia, and supposing it had, like our world, gone wrong, and supposing Christ wanted to go into that world and save it, as he did ours, what might have happened? The stories are my answers. Since Narnia is a world of talking beasts, I thought he would become a talking beast there, as he became a man here. I pictured him becoming a lion there because A, the lion is supposed to be the king of the beasts, B, Christ is called the Lion of Judah in the Bible, and C, I'd been having strange dreams about lions when I began writing the work." Which I just find so funny. But he says the whole series works out like this. The magician's nephew tells the creation and how evil entered Narnia. The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe, the crucifixion and resurrection. Prince Caspian, restoration of the true religion after corruption. The Horse and His Boy, the calling and conversion of a heathen. The Voyage of the Dawn Treader, the spiritual life, especially in Reepicheep. The Silver Chair, the continuing war with the powers of darkness. And the last battle, the coming of the Antichrist in the ape, and the end of the world and the last judgment, which Magician's Nephew and the last battle kind of bookend in the same way that we would say Genesis and Revelation do. But you can kind of see when he's talking why he kept feeling compelled to continue. I've not covered this element. Children need to know about that. Yeah. So yes, that's why he kept going, is because he felt he just had to.
So he keeps going next with the Silver Chair, which is, as you mentioned, a kind of a story about kind of ongoing battle with kind of spiritual forces, and it kind of involves people literally living underground in darkness who need to be redeemed, and they're kind of set free by Eustace and Jill, isn't it?
Yeah.
Then you've also mentioned The Magician's Nephew, which is kind of the story of the professor as a young boy, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. And how kind of Narnia is brought into being, and how Aslan actually sings Narnia into being, doesn't he?
Yes.
And then we also have, as you've mentioned, The Last Battle, which kind of tells the story of a kind of a false Aslan being kind of brought to life. And all the people who visited Narnia at various times are brought back in order to kind of save the day and then go into the new Narnia.
Yeah.
And then the other book, of course, which is hands down the best book of all of them.
Oh, he's going to say
I'm surprised.
Is The Horse and His Boy.
Yes.
Which is the story of Shasta.
Yeah.
Who is kind of redeemed from a life of slavery.
Yeah.
To become a king.
Yeah.
Which it is the best of the books, isn't it?
I would not agree.
Oh, shocking, Sophie.
I would also not agree.
Really?
Yeah.
What would you have chosen?
I would choose The Magician's Nephew.
The same.
No way.
Yeah,
there we go.
No
yeah.
way.
It's just a beautiful book. Great story. And I mean, it's just clinched by that moment where they experience Aslan singing Narnia into being.
Yeah.
It reminds me, and I'll absolutely geek out about this, but it reminds me very much of the Silmarillion, if anybody's read that.
Right, okay.
Tolkien's book on, effectively, the beginning of that is the creation of Middle-earth as well, which has a similar theme.
Yes.
Incredible.
Well, thanks for joining us on this thought. No, I'll give you this. There's a fascinating insight in The Magician's Nephew where so Uncle Andrew, who is a kind of a human character in the book, and he meets Aslan, and he he either won't listen to Aslan or won't have any time for Aslan, and it says that the more his heart hardens towards Aslan, the less he can understand him, until eventually all he can hear is a roar.
Yeah.
Which I thought was a fantastic, a very challenging picture of
Yeah.
what it's like to kind of resist the voice of God.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
What do you love so much about The Magician's Nephew, Sophie?
Oh, well, I wanted to talk about the horse and his
Well,
boy.
we'll come back to that in a second.
I really love how, well, it's a creation story.
Yeah.
And like you, Kier, I love that Aslan sings
Yeah.
into being. I've had quite a long personal journey with singing,
Yeah.
where I've had a great relationship with singing and a not great relationship with singing. But there's a verse in Zephaniah that says that the Lord sings over us.
Yeah.
And I've always felt really challenged by that, actually.
Yeah.
And so in The Magician's Nephew, when Aslan's singing creation into being, it feels exceptionally poignant for me, because when you sing, it's unique. Your singing voice is unique to you. Nobody else can sound like you.
Yeah.
And it, especially when you sing operatically,
Yeah.
it takes so much effort. It's like you using all your body, your
Yeah.
very last ounce of breath to do so. It's extremely emotional. You're combining all these different elements, and to have Aslan sing for me is that it's kind of a culmination of everything of who he is, just an outpouring onto and into this world that we now know and love. So yeah, I really enjoy that. I do quite enjoy as well that it's absolutely carnage at the beginning.
Yes.
It's just wild. Uncle Andrew is awful.
Yeah.
Polly and Diggory are kind of learning about each other, sort of becoming friends, but also sort of not, but kind of going, well, he or she's the only other person sort of my age that I can hang out with, so I may as well. But it's about kind of deception, and so Uncle Andrew entices Diggory to use these rings that he's made to world hop, basically. And I love that as well, kind of seeing different colours of different worlds and what they mean. And when you actually think about children entering some of those environments, you go, wow, that's really harrowing.
Yeah.
The way that Lewis describes these worlds, but they make the children stronger.
Yeah.
Because they're always kind of reaching towards this end goal of beauty. Actually, they're like, no, there must be something better. There must be something better. And this crazy lady Jadis has to be reprimanded for all the evil works that she's doing. So yeah, there's lots of colour in it for me, and I really enjoyed growing up the kind of parallels between Genesis and the book.
I think that's a strong argument for why it's the best book. James, do you want to counter with The Horse and His Boy?
Well, I think that The Horse and His Boy is by far and away the best book in the entire series. I think that the story itself is told entirely in the Narnian world, so there's no reference back to Earth at all. It's actually the story of a boy who discovers that the man he thought of his father isn't his father, and he escapes from his kind of slavish clutches with a talking horse, which of course makes it very exciting already.
Yeah.
He meets a girl who's also escaping a potential forced marriage on a talking horse as well, and they adventure across the desert together. And I don't want to give too much of the story away because it's the best one of the books, and everyone needs to read it.
No, it is.
But they do end up saving the day. And there's lots of stuff in there about friendship and identity and restoration and the kingdom. You also get a really great insight, which I think is it's unique in all of the Narnia series. You get a beautiful insight into what it was like for the 4 Pevensey children to be kings and queens of Narnia. So that little bit that we learn about at the end of the Lion and the Witch Wardrobe, they rule for however long it is before they go back to the the real world. Well, you get a glimpse of that in The Horse and His Boy, and it's just really quite exciting.
It's quite brief as well,
Yeah.
but it is very exciting.
Yeah. So I absolutely love The Horse and His Boy, and loved reading it. The audiobook is absolutely fantastic as well. And that's my absolute favourite.
If you are interested in audiobooks, the BBC did dramatisations as opposed to just a straight reading. The Horse and Its Boy is incredible.
She's coming over to your way of thinking, Jade.
No, it is wonderful. When I first started reading them, and I was, telling friends or talking about it in church, lots of people said, "Oh, you can just skip The Horse and His Boy because it's kind of irrelevant. It's just another story chucked in there. It isn't important to the kind of overall collection." And I couldn't disagree more. It's integral.
Yeah.
It is unique in the fact that it's all in Narnia. You find, like we've already touched on, Edmund and Lucy and Susan, because I don't think
Peter's not in it because he's off fighting a battle, and that's why
Yes.
the rebels think they can take over.
Yes.
Yeah.
Fine. We see them very briefly, as we've touched on, but it is a beautiful
story.
Beautiful
Aslan
story.
turns up. There's a fantastic kind of image around the whole not only thing of redemption, but also how God disciplines us.
Yeah.
There's quite a kind of telling scene where Aslan kind of causes he disciplines somebody, and you learn about it after the fact, and really, really beautiful story. So,
like you're saying, James, about Aslan's role, that's always been my big takeaway from The Horse and His Boy, is actually I learned what the fear of the Lord is like.
yeah, that's a very good way of putting it. Yeah.
And why it's important to have a fear of the Lord. If you read it, as I trust you will, lions keep cropping up throughout the story. And Shasta and Bree and Arvis and I can't remember the name of her horse, but
Gwyn.
yes, are absolutely terrified, and almost more terrified of one lion than they are of this giant army that's kind of constantly on their heels. And there's this interaction with Aslan that both Shasta and Arvis have separately, where he says, "I only tell you your story. Don't be thinking about other people's stories. I'm explaining to you elements of your story and why you needed to go through this." But Shasta asks Aslan about an interaction that they had where a lion was chasing them and injured Arvis, struck her on the back. He's like, what was the point in that? Why did we have that encounter? And Aslan says that he used the strength of fear to propel them on their journey. They have like a mile left to gallop. They're in a huge rush. The army's like really, really close, but they see this gateway that they have to get through. And he's like, "I used the strength of fear to get you there." And that's just always stuck with me, that actually the Lord can use fear in my life to help me progress. And I just thought Lewis wrote it in such a simple way, but it really kind of liberated me that actually it sounds funny, but fear isn't always something to be feared.
Right, yeah.
It's something that can actually be really helpful.
You can actually meet God in it, and he uses that, so yeah.
Well, Sophie, thank you so much for taking us on a journey through Narnia. Thank you for joining us for the last two episodes of the All Nation Church podcast. Kier, it's been a pleasure.
Always.
Shout out to Dave P, to wherever he's hiding. Probably in Narnia, I imagine.
Probably.
Yeah.
Every blessing to you.
Yeah.
See you soon.
See you soon.